Okay.
They're looking at us.
No. So chug along.
Now we're at.
Dr. Heiliger Gemara. So yesterday we were learning about the nemonus of an erechad. We had a machlokes between Abai and Rava about the nemonus of erechad, legabe saying that Aisha was in. So I thank you so much, Mati. I appreciate it. The Gemara rise back and forth, but the Gemara ended up not having a raya, but in the sidelines of the machlokes, we learned a couple of interesting things, such as a ben Gerushin ben Chalutza. If someone finds out during the avodah that he was a ben Gerushin ben Chalutza, all of the avodah that he did until he found out would be kosher. Ma'ashekin, if someone was found to have a mum, all of the avodah that he did when he didn't realize yet that he had a mum would be possible. What's very fascinating that we didn't speak out yesterday is Reb Tarfon was trying to bring a raya that if you toiveled in a mikveh that had a chazaka, that it had 40 saw, and then after you toiveled, it was measured again, and it was found not to have 40 saw, Reb Tarfon held that if you toiveled there, your tar, all of the tahiris that were toiveled in that mikveh are tar until we verified that it lost its 40 saw. And he brought a raya, he's comparing it to Ben Gerushin ben Chalutza, where if we find out that he was a Ben Gerushin ben Chalutza, the time before we find out, the avodah will still be kosher. So there are those Rishonim who say from here something very, very fascinating. That what if a person toiveled in the mikveh, and then he found out that it was measured before he toiveled, not after he toiveled. So it was verified that, in fact, when he toiveled, the mikveh was choser, yet he didn't know about it. There are those who want to learn, Tosfos brings it down, that would also be tar. That's a huge, huge chiddush, because now we already know for sure when he toiveled, it was choser. But since he didn't know, it's still going to be tar. That was a huge chiddush that Tosfos brings down. Okay, Zok the Gemara. Maybe we should just zip through Tosfos inside. I'm up tired from Moshel. I'm in a makabuk. I was back from Tamar. My Moshel, who's that? What about Moshel? Harry be Moshel. I feel a noidish apostle. How you b'shas avoda? I feel a wachei avoda shekshera. The b'samach mikra. V'chihagav negabe mikva. Im nimmt Hashem edidas. He has a tchila b'tos. Parais of Tameos to Mafreya. I feel up Darvin. V'imari the betarti pligi. It's a massive chiddush. Pligi b'tahari shenasu al gabel v'mafreya. Maraz was chazaka. The mikvah, Maraz was chazaka the Adam, and uv'shaloi noida chisaron hamikvah l'mafreya upligi nami b'mikvah shetavo b'koyin v'obra avoida ubo eden ve'idu shahoy hamikvah chaser koydem atfilo raptarvadoim sheir ha'avoida. So it doesn't mean he's tar. It means the avoida that the kohen would have done was tar, even though we have verified that when the kohen toiveled, the mikvah was chaser. And why could a powerful comparison to Ben Gerushin ben Chalutza? Okay, off the charts chiddush, I thought it's important to mention that. Okay, now we're going to learn about yichus. Do you take after your father, or do you take after your mother? That's the question. Who do you take after? Okay. So we're going to see. Kol makom sheyesh Kiddushin ve'ein avera. Anytime someone could marry a woman and Kiddushin will be toifus, and there's no avera. It's a regular mutter deke Kiddushin havlat hoilach achar. And in its simplest terms is if a male kohen marries a female Yisrael, the child is basar dezachar, the child is a kohen. If a male Yisrael marries a female nekeva, the child is a Yisrael. Female kohenis. Thank you. The Eizu. Today that the and what is an example of that? Zukohenes Levia v'Yisraelis Shenosu Lekoyin Levi v'Yisrael. Now this sugi is going to get a little bit complicated because of the following reason. The Mishnah starts with Kol Makom, which is inclusive, which means the Gemara is going to be seeking other examples of Hoilach Achar Zachar in the case of Yesh Kiddushin Vein Avera, that also you go back to the father. But when the Mishnah says Ve'ezuzu, what is the example of such cases? So that's a miyat. So the Gemara is also going to identify cases where there's Yesh Kiddushin Vein Avera, and the Vlad does not go after the son. So there's going to be exceptions, there's going to be addition to the list, and there'll be exceptions to the list. Now we're going up to the second stage. There's a Chalois Kiddushin, but there's an Avera. So not according to Rabbi Kiva, according to Shimon Amsuni, someone is Mekadosh a lady who's usher to him with a lav. She's a mamzeres, for instance. So if there is Kiddushin, but it's an Avera, there's an Issa to do this marriage, Havlat Hoylach Achar Pogum. The one of the two that's Pogum, that to the Vlad will follow. That's a very, very good question. There's no Pgam there, right? That's your question? Right, so we're going to get to it. And as Chaim Fear just asked, how is that Pogum? And Alman is not a Pogum, and the Kohen Gadol is not a Pogum. So what do you mean Halachah Pogum? So we'll put that aside for a second. Mamzeres unesina li Yisrael, those are Yisurim, and the Mamzeres is a Pogum, and the Sina is a Pogum, and Bas Yisrael the Mamzer unesin. So the Rishonim speak out about this Mishnah that Kubi Almana the Kohen Gadol, Rusha v'Chalus l'Kohen Yedid. They're talking not examples of Halachah Pogum. It just means that there will be a Pkam on the child. However, there are those who learn that the Pkam comes because through the Miyah of Almana the Kohen Gadol, the Almana becomes Pogum, she becomes a Chalala, and that's what makes the child a Pogum.
She becomes a Chalala?
Yeah.
She's a Yisur, she doesn't become a Chalala.
If she's an Almana and he's Boyalu, she becomes a Chalala.
But does the Kohen Gadol become also?
While he's married to her, he's possible to do the avodah, but she becomes permanently a halala. So that's how some learn. And Nesina is a woman who was picked up from the street. We don't know where she's from. Oh no, it means she's from the Gevonim. It means she's from the Gevonim. She's from a nation who's not allowed to be married into Klal.
They were given Jah. They were given Chotavaitzim.
That's right. Now they were one of the nations that were prohibited from joining Klal Yisrael, and they came and they lied and they said there's some other nation, and they were accepted. So they're accepted, but they're second-class citizens. Okay. V'chol mi she'ein la alav kedushin. What if you have a woman who there's no tfisis kedushin, but avol yesh la alacherem kedushin? So we're not talking about a goita who nobody could be mekadosher. We're talking about a woman who could have kabbalas kedushin, but this particular kedushin is usher, like achayis ishtoi. Right? You cannot be mekadosh. Kedushin is not toivus on achayis ishtoi because there's a chayve krisis. So then, havlad mamzer. That would create a mamzer. Veza said, what's an example of a mamzer? Oh, I can give you a whole list. Zahaba al achas mikol ha'arai shebetayr. This is someone who's bought on any one of their rights. V'chol mi she'ein la loyalav v'loyal achem kedushin. If this person is not b'tayris kedushin at all, and we'll soon see that's like a goya, then a vlad kamoisa. The vlad will be like the person who has no kedushin. The child of a shivcha and a nachris have the status of a god, which we know, right? We know when it comes to religia, it goes after the mother. Now we're going to break this down.
Why is this mission not in the Suriyah?
I guess we're getting an introduction now. Kol makom sheyesh kedushin. Kol makom sheyesh kedushin. Is that a rule that's guaranteed? You could take it to the bank. The Cholmokoim sheyesh kedushin vein avera havlat hoylach achar asacher. I'm going to give you an example of an exception to that rule. How about a ger shenosam mamzeres? Is a ger allowed to marry a mamzeres? Of course, a mamzeres cannot marry a Yisrael, so a mamzeres will marry a ger. The yesh kedushin, the kedushin is chal vein avera. There's no avera involved, according to one shita, and havlat hoylach achar apoga. We know that child is a mamzer. Why don't you say the child goes after the husband who's a ger and who's not a mamzer? So you see an exception to our Mishnah. The Tanya we learned ger shenosam mamzeres. If a ger marries a mamzeres, havlad mamzer, the child is a mamzer, and you don't go bust the father. Rabbi Yosy, that's the words of Rabbi Yosy. Omar lay, so the Gemara answered back, mi sovrit, masnisin Rabbi Yosy, who said that the author of a Mishnah is Rabbi Yosy. In fact, you have a good proof that the author of a Mishnah can't be Rabbi Yosy, because Rabbi Yosy holds of a different case that does not follow the rule of the Mishnah. But it's going according to Rabbi Yehuda, Damar ger lo yisam mamzeres. Rabbi Yehuda holds a ger is not allowed to marry mamzeres. So now a ger marrying a mamzeres is no longer in the first category of the Mishnah. It's in the second category of the Mishnah, where there's yesh kedushin, but yesh avera that havlad hoylech achar apov. Yesh kedushin, yesh avera havlad hoylech achar apov. Now, what is the machlokes Rabbi Yosy, who holds that the vlad is a mamzer, and Rabbi Yehuda, Rabbi Yosy holds that a ger is allowed to marry mamzeres. And Rabbi Yehuda, who holds a ger is not allowed to marry mamzeres, because the pasuk says a mamzer lo yavoi b'kahal. And the question is a ger considered kahal Hashem? Rabbi Yosy holds a ger is not considered kahal Hashem, and therefore a ger may marry a mamzer. Rabbi Yehuda holds a ger is called kahal Hashem, and the ger may not marry a mamzer. Frek the Gemara. So if this case, according to Rabbi Yehuda, is a case of yesh kedushin v'yesh avera, and it fits perfectly into the rule of the Mishnah that the vlad halach achar pogim v'nisanya. Why didn't the Tana mention it as one of the examples in the second list of items? Zok to Gemara, Tana kol makom, the seifa lo asuye. In the second category, it says v'chol makom sheyesh kedushin v'yesh avera. And as we pointed out earlier, chol makom is telling us that there's other cases that fit this description that the Tana did not list specifically. Or I can argue, maybe it's going according to Rabbi Yosy. Now, if it's going according to Rabbi Yosy, now we have a problem, because it's yes kedushin ve'ein avera. So why is it avlad hoylech achar pogum? Shouldn't you go bust the father? Zakti Gemara v'tana ezai zai lemute. There's a miyat in each case as well. So maybe the miyat is telling me that there's an exception to this rule. There is a case of yesh kedushin, ve'ein avera, and the vlad is still hoylech achar pogum. What is the exception? Ger shenosam mamzeres.
What does this mean? How is the Ezazu?
Which one? With the Mishnah to tell him which is an example? Dafke, these are an example. Nishta nandev. So there's exceptions to this rule.
Okay, it's saying only this, not something else.
Right? Only these are examples of such cases, but there's others that are similar that don't follow this halacha. Right?
It's still a pug.
Correct. V'tana ezazei lemute, ve'ezazu v'suloi. So now you're telling me that dafke these that we listed in the Mishnah, according to Rabbi Yosy, are the examples of yesh kedushin ve'ein avera that the vlad halach achar zocher. But any other example that you'll find me of yesh kedushin ve'ein avera, you don't go basar zocher, such as ger shenosam mamzeres. But what about v'arei chalal shenasa bas Yisrael, a chalal that married a bas Yisrael, the yesh kedushin, there's kedushin is chal, the ein aver. There's no problem with the halal marrying a bas Yisrael. And the halach is havlad hoylech achar hazon. So you see, there's other examples that do fit this halach. So you just said Ezazu tells me that any other example wouldn't follow this halacha. You see, I do have others. Zok gemar holakash. Maybe we hold differently. Maybe the vlad is not hoylech achar hazon. Loi kasha. Rabbi Destoy ben Yehuda severely, and we learned earlier that Rabbi Destoy ben Yehuda holds that if a halal marries a bas Yisrael, the child is not a halal. Remember, it said b'nai Yisrael are mikvah tahira lechalal. We learned. So if a halal marries a bas Yisrael, their child will be a kosher kohen. He will not be a halal.
Not a kosher kohen.
He'll be a Yisrael.
Kosher Yisrael. How could it be a kohen?
Because the father's a kohen.
He's a chula.
Okay, so he's a kosher Yisrael. Okay, but he's a kosher Yisrael. So Zok Gemara. Yeah. Okay. Oh, you know what? I'm making a mistake. I'm talking about if he has a daughter. If he has a daughter, so if a chalal marries a Yisrael and they have a daughter, the daughter would have purged the Isra Halal, and the daughter could marry a Kohen. Yeah, that's what I should have said. That's what Rashi says. So if we hold like Rabbi Stoy, then we don't have a problem anymore. Because if we hold like, why? Because here you have Yesh Kiddushin, the Ein Avera, and in fact, the Vlad is not Hailach Achar Zochar, the Vlad becomes kosher. Frag the Gemara. That's a different case.
Right.
I don't want to talk about that. This is confusing enough as it is. So let's avoid going elsewhere to create confusion. Frag Yisrael, Janosach Halal. A Yisrael who married a Halala. The Yesh Kiddushin, a Yisrael is allowed to marry a Halala. They ain't Aver, and there's no Aver involved. And a Vlad Hoylach Achar Zochar. There you say the Vlad goes after the Zochar, and therefore the Vlad will not be a Halal or a Halala. So it's another example of the case of our Mishnah, but I says Ezoi, meaning there shouldn't be any other examples other than those listed. So Gemara, Tana, Kol Makom Dereisha Lasuye. So now it says Kol Makom Dereisha as well, which means the Tana gave us some examples of Yesh Kiddushin, the Ein Avera, where but there might be additional examples of this halacha that the Tana didn't list, and there also might be cases that are the same case, Yesh Kiddushin Ein Avera, and you wouldn't go Basar Azach. So basically, it very much limits the information in the Mishnah. Basically, all we know from Mishnah is that these four cases listed are cases of Yesh Kiddushin Ein Avera, but any other example you find could either be Basar Zachar or could be not. Okay, Gewaltig. So Kalmokim Dereisha Lasuya. Frek the Gemara in the Sanya Behedja. Okay, I understand. Why you could say there's other cases not listed. But why Taka didn't the Mishnah list it? Why didn't the Mishnah list a case of Yisrael Shenos Chalola? So nice example. Why did they try to list these and not those? Zok Gemara, Mishum Delay Masnila. It wouldn't have fit in to the group of examples that the Mishnah gave. What was the group of examples that the Mishnah gave? A Kohen, a Leviah, a Levi or Yisrael, who married a Kohenes, a Leviah or Yisrael. That was the example. So how did we throw this into the list? Hey, Kohenes, Leviah, Yisrael, Genosas, Lekohen, Levi, Yisrael, V'chalala. I'm sorry. What it should have said, it should have added a fourth item to the list. Kohenes, Leviah, Yisrael, V'chalala, Genesis, Lekohen, Levi, Yisrael. But that's impossible because V'chalala, Lekohen, Michazim. So it would have required a whole separate case. It couldn't have been folded in to the larger case, the general case that the Tana wanted to talk about. So therefore, the Tana didn't itemize this case, and the Tana relied on the Kol Makom that would include that case. What about Rabbi Bar Bar Chana's halacha? The Omar Rabbi Bar Bar Chana, Omar Rabbi Yochanan. Mitri Sheni. We know that halacha is a Mitri is not allowed to marry a Yisrael for 3 generations. So the first generation Mitri, so you have a Mitri, you have an Egyptian, and he becomes a ger. He's not allowed to marry a Israelis. They have a child, so he marries another Mitri ger, and they have a child. This child is second generation. This child may not marry a Yisrael either. So this child has to marry another Mitri, and then they have a child, that's the third generation, that child may marry a Yid. So Frag the Gemara, how about you have a Mitri Sheni? You have a second generation Mitri, Shenasa Mitris Rishona. So the father is second generation. So his son would have been allowed to marry a Bas Yisrael, but he married a woman whose first generation, her son, cannot marry Israel. The halacha is Benot Shlishi. You go Bas Shlishi. So let's think about this. This is a case of Yesh Kiddushin. A Gera Mitri is allowed to marry a Geras Mitri or a second generation Mitri. All right? Ve'ein Aver, Yesh Kiddushin, Ve'ein Aver. And what does our Mishnah say? Havlat Hoylach Achar Hazocher. And what does Rabbi Bar Bar Chana say? The same thing. Havlat Hoylach Achar Hazocher. Because since he was a Sheni, even though she was a Rishon, we give the son the status of the father, and we look at it like he's third generation. So this is also an example that should have been listed in the Mishnah. Right? So that's why we have the Kalmokim. It's a catch-all phrase. There might be other examples.
Cases, but they have the same answer. It's like,
I'm not sure. I'm not sure. I hear. I'm not sure. Break the
First
Gemara.
of all, you know the halucha. You wouldn't know. You wouldn't know the shiny and the shlish. But the word is misnaya.
With the snaya? Okay, thank you.
You don't have the heat before.
Okay.
With
With the snaya. Okay. Break the Gemara. Ulu Rav Dimi, the Amar Sheni Haba. Rav Dimi argues on Rabbi Bar Bachana Amar Rabbi Yochanan. And Rabbi Bar and Rav Dimi holds that if a Mitzri Sheni married a Mitzris Rishayna, the child's a Sheni. It follows Surah. So that's yes, Kiddushin, the Ein Avera, and the Vlad is not Halach Achar Hazoch. It doesn't follow the rule of our Mishnah. So it's no problem. Whatever you find, we don't have a problem anymore. Because the Tana wrote in enough disclaimers that whatever you're going to ask him, he's going to have a way to deny his host. If you find another example that fits his rule, he didn't mention it because the Chazak Kalmokim, and you find an example that doesn't fit the rule,
There are a bunch of cases that are not included.
then we would do the whole Gemara.
No,
Because you won't remember.
so you don't have to.
Only
Break
remember
the
the kasha.
Okay, we got to move on. But Ika, if he asked Rav and Rabbi Yochanan, Rav came in the name of Rabbi Yochanan and said as follows: whenever you're dealing with goyim, you follow the zocher. Meaning, if a goy marries a goy, the nationality will be based on the father's nationality, and that's very, very relevant. The Gemara is going to drill down in this case shortly, but I'll just throw out just a little bit of a taste. There are certain 7 amamin that you're not allowed to buy them as an eved. You must kill them, right? And then there's Greeks and Italians who are regular goy. So the question is, what if a male from the Shiva amamin marries a female who's a Greek or an Italian, and they have a child? Do you have to kill the child? Is there a din of loisachaya of the Shiva amamin? So that's the halacha. If the father is from the Shiva amamin, then you cannot buy them as a slave because they must be exterminated. But if the mother is from the Shiva amamin, it's not a problem. You always follow the nationality of the male by a guy.
Okay, go. We killed out all of them. The only one because
Yeah,
she married.
That's right. Niskaru. What if they became Gerim? Then halach achar apogim shebishnei. You take the worst of the two. You look at who's worse from a yichus perspective, her or him. And the Gemara is going to give examples of when that's relevant.
One previous. The mitzvah is shiny and the shlishi, like you said, that he becomes a shiny.
Okay,
Because she's not-
but the Gemara has other things as well. Tana, eizoizu lemute.
Within the sky after them,
I'm sorry.
sky when
No, if you have 2 goyim that were meskayr,
after they got married.
before or after, it doesn't really matter, right? If they're Jewish, if they're not Jewish, you always follow the father. If they are Jewish, then you take the worst of the yichus. I don't think it matters when they. That's right. They're not goyim anymore. So if the 2 gerim that marry each other, what are their children? Their children will take on the worst traits of the 2 of them. Whoever is in a worse position from Yuchsin, that's who the child's would be. Don't give a mushal. Don't give a mushal. Let's wait for the Amud Beis. The Gemara is going to go through this carefully. But let's first show you. So now we have another example. Now in the case of Niskairu, it's a yesh kedushin ve'en avera. A guy's allowed to marry. I'm sorry.
There's no use.
No, it's not that simple. That just means you don't have to pay him back. But as far as his kam of yichus, like a mitri who's megayer, you don't just kakat shnoiled for 3 generations. He's still not allowed to marry into kliyos, right? So you see, it's not kakat shnoiled. He's not a carte blanche. It just means that if you owed a ger money and he became Jewish, you don't have to pay him. Or if he owed you money, he doesn't have to pay you. Okay. Sure. No. Okay. So sagt Gemara weiter. So once again, we know we have a rule. Yesh Kiddushin ve'ein avera. You go back to the father. Here you see that Rabbi Yochanan says you don't go back to the father. You go back to the pogim shebishneim. So once again, it's an exception to the first case of our Mishnah. Sagt Gemara, no problem. You forgot we have our disclaimer. So basically, any case you throw at me, if it's the same halacha as the Mishnah, I'll say it's included in the Chulam. And any case that you throw at me that has a different halacha, I'll say that's the meat of Ezazai. Zoktamar, Taimai. We got a problem. Let's analyze this carefully. Because you have to, what we're doing here, what we've done here so far is we've analyzed the Kol Mokai and the Eizoi of the first case of Yesh Kiddushin Ve'in Avera Havlat Holich Achar Zocher, and then we analyzed the Kol Mokoim and the Eizoi of the Seifa of Yesh Kiddushin Ve'yesh Avera. So let's have a look at this. Haimai. The Gemara offered two pshatim in the Mishnah. Either we're going according to Rabbi Yehuda that a ger cannot marry a mamzeres, or we're going according to Rabbi Yosy that a ger could marry a mamzeres, right? So Bishlama Masnisin Rabbi Yehuda, who holds that a ger is allowed to marry a mamzer. I'm sorry, Rabbi Yehuda holds that a ger may not marry a mamzeres. So Bishlam, if you can learn like Rabbi Yehuda, that a ger may not marry a mamzeres. So therefore, you'll say Kol Mokim de Reisha. The Kol Mokim of the Reisha is telling us Lasuya Yisrael Shenosa Chalala. A Yisrael who married a Chalala will also a Yisrael who marries a Chalala. You would still go Basa de Zachar, Uderabba Bar Chana, and it would also include the case of Rabba Bar Chana, who taught us that a mitzvah sheni shenat, a mitzvah shishona, v'not shlishi goes Basa the father, and Eizoi, the exception to the halacha of the Reisha of Kol Sheyesh L'Kiddushin Ve'in Avera V'Adach L'Chazachar, the exception will be Lamuti de Rav Dimi. It would exclude Rav Dimi's halacha, who told us that the mitzvah is a sheni, which means you're going Basar her, not Basar him. And V'Ravin, the halacha of Ravin is Nisgaru Halach Achar Pagum Shebishtayim. That's how Rabbi Yehuda would learn the Kol Mokim of the Reisha is adding cases, and the Eizoi of the Reisha is excluding cases. Now let's look at Kol Mokim and Eizoi of the Seifa. And then Kol Mokim the Seifa is going to add a case of Havlat Holich Achar Pogum. Kol Mokim the Seifa, let's see a Ger Shenosa Mamzeres. And in the case of Ger Shenosa Mamzeres, the child remains a Mamzer. Eli Amrit. And Ger Shenosa Mamzeres is also an Isser according to Rabbi Yehuda. So it fits into the second category. Eli Amrit Rabbi Yosy, if you want to learn that our whole mission is going according to Rabbi Yosy, so Kol Mokim de Reisha Kedam Rora. We already listed the cases of Kol Mokim, meaning additional cases that you would add to the case of the Mishnah, additional cases of Yesh Kiddushin Ve'ein Avera, where the Vlad goes after the Zohar, and Eizoi Kedam Rora. We also listed off several cases where it's Yesh Kiddushin Ve'ein Avera, and the Vlad goes Basar Pogum. We have exceptions. Ela Kol Mokim de Seifa Lo Siyamai. What are you going to use Kol Mokim in the Seifa? There is no additional case of Yesh Kiddushin V'yesh Avera that have Vlad Achar Pogum. So why did the Mishnah use a lotion of Kol Mokim in the Seifa? According to Rabbi Yehuda, it's adding the case of Ger Shenosa Mamzeres, which he holds as a Yesh Kiddushin Ve'ein Avera. But according to Rabbi Yosy, it's not adding anything. So you have a Kol Mokim, which is a rebuy to other cases, and there are no other cases that the Tana could be referring to with the Kol Mokim. For the Gemara, you think it's any better according to Rabbi Yehuda? Rabbi Yehuda, Eizoi to say for Lomali. Eizoi is also a mute. That means there's other cases of Yesh Kiddushin Ve'ein Avera that don't follow this halacha. You don't have any examples of those, so then why did the Tana say Eizoi in the same? Elamai, what are you going to have to say? The Tana Reisha Eizoi. The Tana likes uniformity. Once he had to use the phrase Kol Mokim and Eizoi in the Reisha, Tana Teifa Eizoi. So you, Rabbi Yosy, have to agree that there's no purpose of the Eizoi in the Seifa. It's just because the Tana wants to express everything in a parallel fashion, use the same format. So I could say the same thing with the Kol Mokim. Hachanami, I did the Tana Reisha Kol Mokim, Tana Nami Seifa Kol Mokim. So the Kol Mokim and the Eizoi are very, very important to have in the Reisha, but in the Seifa, we don't have too many additions or subtractions. Nufa. Now we're going to dig down into this halacha that we were all talking about.
Was a good lawyer, Karag, just in case.
Yeah. Ki Atza Ravin, Rabbi Yochanan. When Ravin came, he said to them, But Umois, when it comes to Goyim, Halach Achar Zohar. Whenever two people from two different nations marry, you always follow the nationality of the male. Nisgairu, and this is a very important halacha we're going to learn, especially someone who's marrying off sons and daughters. You need to know these rules as a shver, when you can expect the kids to come to you and when not. We're just coming after Yom Tov, and we're always thinking, hey, but the kids live in Lakewood a whole year. How come they don't come to me a whole Yom Tov, right? How come they go to you? They should come to me. They should have a baby, come to me, right? So here the Gemara is going to tell about the rules of who comes to who when. Zok the Gemara, and we learn it from the Goyim. So So, frankly, what's an example? My umois holach achar zoch. Kiditanya. Minayin le'echad min umois. How do you know if an Italian or a Greek or a Frenchman comes to Israel, Shabal Knainis, and he marries a Knainis, V'haylid ben, and they have a child, he's not considered a Knaini, he's considered a Frenchman, he's considered a Greek. Talmud Loimar, it says in the pasuk, visitors, guests that are here, you're allowed to buy from them avodim. You don't have to kill them. Yochal af evet sheba al shivcha mina umois.
Stop. The Shulman was not a visitor.
Let me finish explaining and then ask. Yochal af evet sheba al shivcha mina umois. B'hoyled ben shata rashoylik noisa be'eved. You would have thought that if you have a local who was bought on a foreigner, that would also not be considered a knaini. Talmud loimer asher helidu be'artzachem. So what does it say in the pasuk? The people who are visiting, those are the people you could buy from. So we learn from here, which we learn, and this is how it works. If a Canaanite girl marries a guy from Italy, she's going to come back to have her babies. So what's going to happen is, now her husband is visiting, he came for the baby. That's allowed, because that means the father is a foreigner. But if they actually live in your land, meaning it's a Knaini who went and married a foreigner, and maybe they had the baby over there, but they settled back where he lives, there, you're not allowed to buy such an Eved, because that's a Knaini. So you see, it goes bust with the man. So from here you see that they live, the place where the child to shut up their home is where the man lives, but when they have a baby, they have to go to the in-laws to have the baby. That's what you see from this Gemara. But you see how it works. That doesn't help you for Yom Tov. But you see that when the child has the baby, they come home, but they live elsewhere. So that's how you determine, is this a Knaini or not? If the baby was born here, the baby's probably not a Knaini, the baby's probably a foreigner that came here just to have the baby. But if the baby was born there and they're living here, that's a Knaini, that's going to be us. So that is a good example of two goyim halach achar zocher. If the male is condemned, then azoy geitis. How about nisgairu halach achar pogim shebishnei? B'mai ilema b'mitri shenotza amoinis. If it's speaking about a mitri that married an amoinis, my pogamik. If a mitri married an amoinis, there's no it's not the worst of the two. The amoinis has no pigam at all, and the amoinis is a perfectly mutadika woman to marry, like Boaz married Rus Amayavia. Ella, you have to say my pogamika amoni v'lo amoinis. Ella must be ba'amoni shenosa mitris, an amoni that married a mitris. So let's think about it. If an amoni marries a mitris and they have a male child, okay, if it's a male child, then then say he's a male amoni and he's also to come the kal forever. But if it's in the keva, then you don't want it to be an amonis, because then she'll be mutter and ganset. So shadya brasa dida, make her into a mitris, at least it's also for 3 generations. So pogum shebishnei means it doesn't work with the mitri and the mitris. We're trying to show you always pick what's going to be the worst of the two, and it could change depending on what type of child it is. Gewaltig. Zog more about it. If there's no Kiddushin chal at all, meaning it's a rayis. How do we know that Kiddushin is not toifis by a rayis? Rashi says we're not looking how we know that the child is a mamzer. That we know, we're looking for how we know that Kiddushin is not toifis by a rayis. Reb Chiba Abba said in the name of Rabbi Yochanan, Umatuba mishum de Rabbi Yanai, Rabbi Achabarei the Rava. There are those who say this over in the name of Rabbi Yanai and Rabbi Achabarei the Rava. Umatuba, there are those who say this over mishum Rabbi Yochanan. How do we know that the Kiddushin is not toifis by chayvik reasons?
First,
Amakra
and Rabbi Yochanan is a top.
Okay. Amakra v'yotza mibeisai v'halcha v'hoysel lishach. The Torah in the Parsha of Gershon says she will leave your household after you divorce her. And who will she marry? An ish acher, a foreigner. Lacherim v'loy lekroivim. She could only have a haisa. Her Kiddushin will only be toifus upon her if she marries a complete stranger, not a relation to her original husband, a relation that would be prohibited with a chiyuv of course. That's how we know Kiddushin is not toifus by chayv krisus. Matzkiv lo Rab Abba, Frek Rab Abba, who said that from ish acher lacherim v'lo lekroivim is coming to say that no arayis at all have a tefisas Kiddushin. Maybe it's only referring to one of the arayis. Maybe all it means to say is Kiddushin not toifus in the ben. What's up is the ben? So Rashi, because the ben is the closest relation. Maybe la'acher v'lo lekroivim referring to vata muvalo tevasta. The most close to her husband is the son. That's where there's no tefisas Kiddushin. But maybe all other arayis there would be tefisas Kiddushin. Zok Gemara, I don't need this remez of la'acher v'lo lekroivim to tell me that Kiddushin is not toifus by a ben. You know why? Because Ben Behedik Sibbe. We have a mafurish pasuk that tells us that Kiddushin is not toifus by her son. Because it says, Lo yikach ish es eshes aviv. You should not marry the wife of your father, which is exactly the case of Ben. Achar lomali. So we already know it says Lo yikach. We already know ein loy bali kuchen. We already know there's no tefisas Kiddushin if someone tries to marry his mother or his father's wife. So why does it say it can't be coming to tell me Ben? It's telling us about all the rayas that Kiddushin is not toifus. No. Maybe I need still both psukim for Ben. I already know it says maybe maybe I need two psukim to tell me that a son cannot marry his father's wife, because one to tell you that it's usher to do, and one to tell you that if you even attempt to do it, it won't work. Maybe you need two psukim. I don't need the pasuk of Yikach Ishes Aviv to tell me that lechatchila he's not allowed to marry his father's wife. I already know that from Achos Isha. How do I know it from Achos Isha? Uma Achos Isha b'karis lo siktish. I know that you're not allowed to marry the sister of your wife. And there's only an Isser Chorus. There's only a Isser Chiyav of Mitzvah D'Shemayim. Chayiv and Mrs. Bezdin. Marrying your father's wife, which is Chayiv Mrs. Bezdin, Chayiv Chenek. Loi Kolchagain. Surely it's also to marry her. So therefore, I know it's also to marry her from Achois Isha. I know from Yikach Ishes Aviv that Kiddushin will not be toifus if a son tries to marry his father's wife. So when it says it must be referring to all other arayis that Kiddushin is not toifus. Maybe the ishacher is referring to Achos Isha, that there's no tefisas Kiddushin. And the halach atchila hadievet. You're right. I don't have a raya. I cannot apply lacherim v'loy lekroivim to all arayis. I only can apply to Achos Isha. So the question remains: how do I know that by all arayis Kiddushin is not toifus? Zok Gemara, I'll learn it with a binyan from Achos Isha. Ashkechan Achos Isha. Shar arayis v'noah. How do I know other arayis Kiddushin is not toifus? Zok Gemara, Yalfinon me Achos Isha. I can learn it from Achos Isha. And what was the limud? Ma Achos Isha miyuchedes she erva. Achos Isha is an erva. V'chayovin al zadoyna kares v'al shigagol tzchatos. If b'mezid you're over it is a chi of kares, b'shogig is a chi of chatos, and v'loy tafsi ba Kiddushin. We know there's no tefisas Kiddushin because of the limud lacherim v'loy lekroivim. So let's apply that equally to all the other arayis. Av kol she erva v'chayovin al zadoyna kares v'al shigagol tzchatos v'tafsi ba Kiddushin. So that's pretty good. That covers off the vast majority of all the arayis that, in fact, we learn from Achos Isha Kiddushin Zatoifus. But there's two exceptions that we wouldn't know from Achos Isha. Bishlam Akul Asya. Eishes Ish, I couldn't learn from Achos Isha, and Eishes Ach, I couldn't learn from Achos Isha. Why? Ikal Mifrach Mal Achos Isha. Achos Isha, you know why Kiddushin is not Toifus? Chekain Ein La Heter B'Makam Mitzvah. Achos Isha, there's no case where because of a mitzvah we would waive the issue of Achos Isha. Tomer be'Eishes Ach, Sheyesh La Heter B'Makam Mitzvah. Eishes Ach has a kula to it. You know why? Sometimes we allow someone to marry Eishes Ach. When? By evil. So maybe Kiddushin should be Toifus, even B'Makam Mitzvah. Eishes Shishnami, Ikal Mifrach, Malahanach, Shekain Ein La Heter B'Chaya Oishra. Achos Isha, as long as your wife is alive, you're never ever allowed to marry her sister. That's very chomer. But a Nesha Shish, who asks her? Her husband. If he gives her get, she's mother. So maybe these two women, Kiddushin should be typhus. Amar Kra, a big, massive hekish. Kol Asher Yaser, Mikol Hatoy Evoisa. The Torah wraps all of the arayas together. V'nichbus. Hukshu Kol Harayas Kulam Lachois Isha. A hekish already on that Chakasha. Ma Chois Isha, Lo Topsi Bakadushin, Av Kol Harayas Kulam, Lo Topsi Bakadushin. All arayas, if you try to be Mekadosh, a woman who's an erity with Chiv Koretz, the Kiddushin will not be typhus. Developing. We can stop here, Baruch Hashem. We're at 6:48. I have 2 minutes to spare, and we Baruch Hashem finish the daf. But since I have 2 minutes to spare, let's go on to Amar Aleph. Ihachi, back to Gemara. Afilu Nida Nami. Nida as well. She is a Chayve Krisus. So why is it that Kiddushin will be typhus? As Rashi says, in Kiddush Penuya B'meni Dusa. If someone was Mekadosh a woman and she happens to be a Nida at the time that he makes the Kiddushin, Lala have a Kiddushin. The Kiddushin shouldn't work. V'imba 11 Nida. So you have Vlad Mamzer. And therefore, we know they travel together. If someone is Boil Anida, the child should be a Mamzer. Alama Amar Abaye, why did Abaye say, Hakoil Moidim, everybody agrees, B'val Anida, V'ala Soita, if someone is born Anida, or an Asoita, a woman who's usher to him because she did an Aveira, even though it's also for him to have that Bia, and there's a Chayiv Karis involved, she ain't a Vlad Mamzer. The Vlad wouldn't be a Mamzer. According to your logic, the Vlad should be a Mamzer. Amar Chizki, Amar Kra, we have special psukim to tell us that the child's not a Mamzer. It says, Useidi das alov, Usehidi das alov, we learn that Filu B'shas Nidasa, even if she's a Nida, Tehei B'havaya, there will still be Tvisas Kiddushin. Okay, let's stop here.